Hello and welcome to today's Operate with Increased Revenue in a Post-COVID World webinar. For this webinar, attendees will be in a listen-only mode. If you need technical assistance, please submit your request under the Tech tab in the window in the top right-hand corner of your computer screen. If you wish to submit a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A window in the top right-hand corner of your computer screen. We will try to answer all questions during the webinar, but if an in-depth answer is needed, or if we run out of time, we will try to answer your question at a later time via email. The presentation will now be turned over to Chuck Nervik.
Good day, everyone. I'm Chuck Nervik, Senior Vice President at Media Edge Communications. On behalf of our business partners at the Canadian Gaming Association, we sincerely hope that you, your families, and all staff are well as we continue to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome to today's Canadian Gaming Summit webinar entitled Operate with Increased Revenue in a Post-COVID World. A special thank you to our Summit webinar sponsors today, IGT and Kambi. With public health driving the narrative for reopening gaming properties, today's webinar will look at various options that include new information to help gaming industry present a framework to government stakeholders that would empower the industry to reopen with the safest public health and safety solutions possible. Today, we will look at innovative ways that U.S. gaming properties have addressed public health and safety, ways to maximize revenues, lessons learned, positive response from U.S. and Canadian public health agencies, and how U.S. properties have mitigated COVID at unprecedented levels. We will also discuss how the gaming industry can present public health with an innovative framework that includes privacy-centric pandemic mitigation that goes above and beyond anything previously presented. We're proud today to have our presenter, Vic Merjanian, who's the founder and CEO of Titan Health and Security Technologies, Inc. Vic has led the company's global market development and innovation, delivering military-grade two-way communications to fulfill his mission and commitment to making the world safer. Having received a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from University of California, San Diego, and subsequent Juris Doctorate from University of San Diego School of Law, Merjanian saw the need to address crises before they happen. After Vic's presentation, please stay with us for our webinar Q&A period. During the presentation, please submit your questions in the chat function. It is now my true pleasure to turn things over to Vic.
Hello all, my name is Vic Merjanian and I am the founder and CEO of Titan HST. Today we'll be talking about how to reopen casinos and focusing on some of the lessons that we've learned over the last year. When we talk about reopening casinos and generally opening this sector of the economy, there are a couple different considerations that we have to keep in mind. The first is reopening casinos in a manner that adheres to and frankly addresses the common threats that existed before the pandemic, those specifically relating to human safety and general operations. And that can be further broken out into the safety of employees and staff, as well as the safety of guests. The second piece, which has been introduced in a post-COVID world, is how to keep people safe from viral and other sorts of issues as well too. So we'll be talking about how to reopen casinos safely from both a traditional sense as well as in the post-COVID world. And we'll also be talking about an additional factor as well too. With many places across the world having been closed over the last year, it's more important than ever that we're able to increase revenue generation per person that's coming through. And the best way to do this is to increase the customer experience, to enhance the customer experience. And by doing that, being able to increase revenue per customer. In a pre-COVID world, of course, more revenue per customer is always a wonderful thing. In a post-COVID world, we have to make up for lost time and all the revenue that's been lost over the last year, while enhancing customer interaction with the site and also making sure that all stays safe. With that in mind, there are a handful of things that we look at when talking about opening in a post-COVID world. The first is enhancing building intelligence. And this really goes past kind of the buzzwords that we've heard over the years. You know, what is building intelligence in kind of a high sense? People have really used a whole bunch of different definitions for this concept. I've seen things as basically mundane as a sensor. I've seen maps, things like that. But really what we're getting to here is enhancing data, right? Intelligence in the sense of enhancing the data that is collected from the site, of course, in a privacy-centric manner that allows you to not only keep employees and guests safe by traditional standards from, for example, violence, shooters, assaults in hotel rooms, on casino floors, slip and falls, those kinds of things, but also in a post-COVID world, safe from virus. And so when you talk about building intelligence, you're really talking about a method in which you're able to collect data that is actionable. It's going to give you something that you can do something with that to improve safety. And if it's done right, that data can also help you improve the customer experience while generating more revenue for the casino on top of that. Now, a key aspect of this is making sure that the platform is secure and privacy centric. We, all of us, love apps, we love platforms, we love electronics. And if you take a look at kind of the last few years of where things have gone, people are always chasing, whether it's cell phones going from 3G to 4G to 5G and things like that, or just whatever it might be, and taking a look at electric cars and all that. People like toys, people like electronics. But one of the key things that you have to keep in mind is that security is really key, and there is quite a bit of focus on security from a data security measure, right? From cybersecurity, from encryption, and all those kinds of things. But that's only as good as the adoption of the technology. If you don't have people adopting the technology, then what are you securing? And so it's really key to put confidence in the end user, whether that is a customer who's coming through the casino or if it is staff and other employees. And so by being privacy centric, and I can't stress that enough, by being privacy centric, you have to ensure that people know their data is not being shared, it is not being sold, it is being kept in a way that is in accordance with the benefit to their interaction with the site, both from a safety standpoint and from an enhancement of their experience at the site. That really drives up adoption. And we can do that, again, with either dedicated hardware, passive analytics. You can do that with dedicated apps, such as our platform, or even, we've built code that lets you integrate into your own app. And the benefit of that is having as many touch points as possible so that people are being met where they're at, right? You're not asking people to change their behavior. You're asking them to do what they're already doing, whether it's your own site app, your own check-in, your own text message, whatever it is, and enhancing the data and the interaction from that. Now, if these things are done right, the same foundation that you're laying out for improving safety and security. Now, what does that look like? One example of that is in hotel room security. So, for example, if you have people delivering food or cleaning hotel rooms, incidents of assaults have been increasing, and particularly these days, the world, with all that's gone on with COVID, there seems to be a little bit of pent-up anger, frustration, anxieties, and we have seen an uptick in violence in sites, if nothing else, by all the increase in mass shootings on the North American continent. But basically, if you are doing this correctly, and by that I mean putting systems that allow for the proper safety of staff, whether that is a system that will assist you in properly finding where a panic button is being triggered. Now, a lot of systems might do something where they're deploying panic buttons on a general floor or in an entire building or something like that. But if you're going down to the actual room, which frankly provides the best employee safety, then you're setting up the framework for not only improving guest safety as well too, but opening up a possibility for revenue generation by allowing micro analytics of the site. You can see where people are, where they're spending time, data flows. And in fact, if you integrate the technology into your own site app, if you have one, you can even do things like order food and know exactly what room the food order is coming from, where people are at, how long they spent in there. And so these are the kinds of analytics and intelligent things that can generate revenue by providing analytics on what people are doing inside of the facility, but leveraging the backbone of the safety protocols for panic buttons and other sorts of asset tracking and things like that. The last piece of the equation and the pie really is coming down to something that's user-friendly and multilingual. The more you have to educate the audience on how the platform works, the less likely you're going to have adoption. So you've got to have a system that's really easy to use. And the first piece of that is making sure people can interact with you. If you take into consideration that English or any given language in any country may not be the primary language, you have to have a system that is multilingual. If you're not able to get people to understand what they're interacting with, then you've already lost the battle. So by having a platform that's multilingual, And I want to break out multilingual a little bit more here. We're not talking just about multilingual in the traditional sense of spoken language, but also capturing people who are hard of hearing and or visually impaired as well too. So you're capturing the totality of the populations that may be interacting at your site. And by having something like that, that's the first step, right? So that people can interact and know what they're reading, know what they're doing. And then making sure that the platform is user friendly and intuitive, you really open up the possibility to increase adoption, increase engagement, make it enjoyable. And with that, not only have you taken steps to increase safety, but also increase your opportunity to generate revenue. So with this, let's dive into a little bit about what the technology actually looks like. From an emergency communication standpoint, it's really important to hit a few different key issues. The first issue is for a person to be able to raise a request for help. Now, again, going back into user friendliness and simplicity, obviously apps are all the rage these days, and apps are fantastic. But you also have to have a way that you can capture users via things like text message, email, phone. Is it just your vendor app, or is it the native app for the site as well too, which people might have downloaded already? What about people who don't have apps and text messages? What about dedicated hardware like panic buttons? So the first piece is being sure that you've got a system that can basically allow anyone to raise an emergency alert who you have authorized to raise an emergency alert. The first step is having the ability to know when something is going on in your site and having the ability to quickly and accurately know where that's coming from and dispatch assistance. Second piece of the pie is basically getting down to a mass broadcast. And mass broadcast systems, they tend to be a dime a dozen, but there are certain factors that you really need to get into. Some of the more basic functions and factors that you have to evaluate is how long are the characters that you're allowed to send through there? Are you limited to very short messages, perhaps only 100 characters long, or longer, over 1,000? Do you have to abbreviate everything that's going through? What's the speed of the system? And not just the speed of the backend, but does your front end system, does your cellular infrastructure, does your Wi-Fi infrastructure, does it have the bandwidth to push through these notifications? But it goes a step further than there. What happens if you have a power outage, a hurricane, a snowstorm, a rain? What happens when your network is overloaded, out of range, or just goes down? Do you have something like mesh networking that's built into the platform that enables an additional layer of redundancy where traditional networks may be overloaded or hindered in some manner? So these are the kinds of questions that you have to be asking when you're looking at mass broadcast notifications. Because if an SOS alert requests help and it goes up the food chain, then someone at the top needs to be able to respond and notify others if there's a fire or shooting, a natural disaster, and give instruction. And that instruction needs to be received quickly by all the parties and stakeholders necessary, whether that's staff, guests, security teams, etc. Of course, communicating with group chats and lockdowns are key factors as well too. Another thing that's generally not really accounted for is safety status. You know, just because you know that there's an emergency going on, it doesn't answer the question of, okay, so we know there's a shooting. Okay, we know that there's a power outage, a fire, whatever it is. But are all people affected the same? Probably not. If you have a shooting in one wing of the casino, or if you have a fire in one wing of the casino, what about the other wings? So knowing where people are and where their safety status is allows you really to respond more quickly through a form of triage, essentially, by deploying assets first to the areas most impacted, while perhaps evacuating places less impacted. And a document repository is another issue that we've come across the need for more and more in recent years. And this one's a really interesting one. Traditionally, people would say, I need a way to carry all my emergency materials with me and have quick access to them. And that's great, and that's a fantastic use case. But in more modern days, a really common example of a problem that we've had is ransomware attacks. And with ransomware attacks, sites have been knocked offline or locked out, and the very systems in which they would access to remobilize IT, to remobilize their company, we found that they don't have access to those systems and documents and videos, etc., sitemaps, whatever there might be. So having a system that is separate, that stores those emergency materials, allows you to mobilize more quickly. So let's talk about some of the things that we teased out in the last slide. So when we're getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of all of this, an emergency communication system is only as good as its weakest link, right? It's only as good as its weakest link. We have identified 3 key areas where emergency communication systems tend to falter. The first is finding people in an emergency. It's really hard to know where people are at and what's going on. So with technologies like augmented reality and mapping, you can see where people are inside of your site so that you can deploy resources more quickly. Now, that's a great use case if you have someone being assaulted in a hotel room, such as someone who's cleaning the rooms or someone who's delivering food. And that, unfortunately, is a story we hear more and more these days. And it's really key to know where they are quickly so you can send help there. The number of times we've heard about sites that didn't have a system or had a system that was not accurate, it was not deployed down to the room level, and they were either not notified or were notified and couldn't find what room it was coming from. It's really quite heartbreaking. So having an ability to know where that's coming from and visualize that is really key. A second key issue that we've seen over and over again is a language barrier. It's as old as time, right? Not everyone speaks the primary language of any given site. Whatever that language is, it could be English, it could be Spanish, it could be French, whatever the language is. Whatever the site is operating in may not be, especially in the hospitality sector and casinos and hotels. By their very definition of their business model, they have people visiting from out of state, out of country, out of overseas. And so having a system that can translate in real time and bridge that language barrier is really key, because if people don't understand what you're sending, or if you don't understand what they're sending you, well, where are you going from there? You have the ability to transmit information, but not the ability to understand it. So with a real-time translation system, you're able to bridge that language barrier. And the last piece, going back into the previous slide, is mesh networking. You've got to have something that's going to work even when the networks go down. And if I had a dollar for every time someone told us, the network is really resilient, this, that, whatever. Of course, I'm sure it is. Everything is resilient these days. Things are really built up and whatnot. But with natural disasters, with power outages, with even the best places, they tell us, well, we got generators and that kind of stuff. That's great, but then you ask them how long the generators can power, and it's not very long. Or we ask them how long does it take for the generator to come on? Minutes. Well, what if you have to evacuate during those minutes? So having a system that is able to continue to operate when the networks are impacted is really, really key. And we see this more and more. And interestingly enough, primarily due to weather events, though we've had quite a number over the years of where infrastructure was accidentally disrupted, where the backhaul was disrupted or something like that. So let's talk about hardware for a minute. We've done a lot of talking about software, but when we talk about hardware, there's a few areas that really hardware kind of solves. The first is having a panic button based system that will allow you to give people who are going into rooms a way to trigger for help quickly if someone assaults them while cleaning rooms, delivering food, dropping off luggage, etc. The flip side of that, when you're looking at a customer facing aspect of it, is you can hand these out for clients who are visiting who may otherwise be handicapped or have disabilities. And having a button that they can trigger quickly if they fall or need medical assistance is the flip side of that. Now, one method of this, again, is triggering help on demand. A secondary method is a location tag where you can track assets or individuals where needed. We see this done frequently in the COVID world, and we will dive into that more in a moment. And that really gets into making sure that proper sanitization protocols are being followed. Of course, micro-location and mesh networking is always key as well. And you can, of course, address this with software, but also layer on additional hardware on top of that. Let's talk about COVID for a minute. So as we've been dealing with the reopening, and again, a lot of places have been opening, closing, and with vaccines and whatnot, the hope is that places will remain more open than they are closed. But we have come across 4 separate areas that are particularly impacted with COVID and struggles that places face as they're trying to reopen. The first is pre-screening. In a perfect world, if you can make sure that people are not sick when coming in, that's the best place to start off with, right? And when you're talking about pre-screening, you're basically able to check if people are sick or not. And for the sake of employees, you might even be able to have a QR code where you can control ingress control. But screening, as with anything, is not 100%. People may not know they were sick and they might come in. So what happens once you have someone who's sick who's indoors? Well, you get contact tracing. But contact tracing, it's very interesting if you look at the market. Most people are doing phone-to-phone contact tracing, which is fine, but there's a few problems with that. First, most people doing phone-to-phone contact tracing are being tracked by some sort of government entity or agency. And frankly, they're being tracked everywhere. People don't want to be tracked everywhere, which then impacts adoption. If you impact adoption, then the contact tracing is not helpful because you don't know who you're coming into contact with. So what do you do about that? The first thing that you do is you limit the contact tracing to the site. You geofence it. So people are confident that you're not tracking them anywhere and everywhere. Second thing you have to address is phone-to-phone contact tracing is great, but in crowded areas like casinos, hotels, stadiums, venues, etc., phones simply cannot connect to that many devices at the same time, so you're missing contacts. By using the same micro-location beacons that you're using for panic buttons for people going into the rooms, like staff and guests and all of those, you can do two levels of contact tracing. You can do phone to phone and phone to zone. That way you capture people even when there's a lot of phones and they can't all connect, or in an area where people were there and were sick and they left and someone came in a minute later, the area was still contagious, but the phones never crossed paths. So having two levels of contact tracing with a privacy-centric envelope and geofence around the site is a really great way to increase adoption and get better data. Third issue is population density monitoring. That's very key. That's very key because, again, when you're talking about reopening, everyone's still talking about 6 feet of distance and whatever those metrics are. Making sure that you don't have more people than what's safely allowed in an area is a very key piece of that, and being able to be notified when that exceeds is critical to making sure that public health agencies have the confidence in any given site to allow them to stay open and not become a super spreader site. The last piece is sanitation confirmation. Now this one's interesting. This one can not only confirm routine maintenance, it can confirm cleaning or cleanliness after a known incident. And that's great from a standpoint of stopping the spread. Also, if anyone were to contract COVID at your site, you'd be able to show that the infected area was cleaned before the person was then exposed to that area. So it can reduce your liability exposure. So looking at this again, you've got to have the ability to pre-screen, multiple levels of contact tracing while putting it on a privacy-centric shell, density monitoring, and sanitization confirmation. We're going to dive onto the last two slides, and now we're going to talk about revenue generation. Remember, at the very beginning of this, we mentioned emergency communication is key to keeping safe all of your staff, your guests, and others like vendors who might be coming through. That same technology, of course, can be leveraged for COVID to enable a safe, a viral, mitigated way to come back in. But what about increasing revenue, right? We've got to make up for lost time and increase revenue just going forward, because as a business, it's always good to increase revenue opportunities. Now, if you take a look here, you can have, with the same backbone of an emergency communication platform, if done right, you'll have the ability to actually leverage that micro-location technology for location-based advertising, QR codes, things that you can scan. But it doesn't stop there. You can also have things like preset thresholds. So basically, if you have people in certain areas, you can send location-based notifications, as well as monitoring real-time analytics, which goes back to one of the first things we talked about. And with those real-time analytics, you have the ability to not only know where people are at, it helps you with security so that you can have security guards and personnel in areas that are more heavily trafficked. You can have better cleaning for COVID by, for example, areas or gaming areas that have restrooms, places that are more heavily trafficked. And from an analytic and revenue generation perspective, you can put advertisements, specials, perhaps even for restaurants and things like that that might be on site, charge more per square foot based on real-time analytics of where people are, where data is flowing, and what's going on. So to take things back out, all the way out to the top, the best way to help reopen the casino, hospitality, stadium, and venue sector is essentially on focusing on emergency communication that can serve as the foundational basis for providing COVID response, all under an umbrella that can create additional revenue generation opportunities by enhancing customer experience and providing better data analytics to sites. With that, you can have the confidence to reopen safely. You can help governments and regulators see that there is a concrete plan on providing both emergency response and mitigation methods for viral loads, all while welcoming the public back and making sure staff feel safe to come back to work as well. With that, we will be turning to any questions and into a live discussion.
Vic, thank you again for joining us today. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. We've got some time for a few questions that came in. And again, but our sincere thanks for
Thank you
joining us today.
very much for joining us today, Vic, and for your excellent, timely, and relevant presentation. To all of those with us today, please note that we will be sending...
Phil, we're the live Q&A now.
Sorry, yes, we're into the live Q&A now. We just advanced to, just to another slide, but it's time for questions now, so all over to you.
Okay, great, thank you. And thanks again, Vic. Sorry about that little hiccup, guys. Thank you for joining us today. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So Vic, how important is contact tracing really?
So contact tracing is a really important piece of the pie, and the reason for that is you need to have a way that you can open, but make sure that you've got confidence both in the safety of the reopening, as well as making sure that you can give specifically governments a way to feel good about letting you reopen as well too. So what the contact tracing basically allows you to do is the first level is it instills confidence in both the staff and in the guests. From a staff standpoint, if people are going to come back to work, ideally, they want to know that they're going to be in a safe workplace. And guests want to have the confidence that they're coming back to a place where, you know, reasonable efforts are being made to prevent people from being sick. And if people are sick, that ideally they're kept out or they're notified. The other piece of this is taking a look at why there were lockdowns in the first place, right? The lockdowns that came through, the quarantine mandates, it was basically to maintain some level of baseline as far as the ability for hospitals to treat people. And as the ICUs got full, the hospitals reached capacity, and we had to shut down places so that the hospitals could basically create capacity for more sick people. And so with this contact tracing, you're basically telling governments, look, we're not going to be burdening the healthcare system. We're actively out here. We're making sure that our business is able to operate safely. People coming in will be safe. Staff will be safe. And the contact tracing is allowing a mechanism by which to tell all stakeholders from government, business owners, and guests, come here, have fun, let's get back to business, and we'll make sure that people are doing this in the safest, reasonably safest way possible.
Okay. Sort of along the same lines, there's a number of companies that offer, you know, COVID mitigation services, emergency communications. So let the audience know what they should be looking at in terms of how they make their selections, and a little bit about why you guys are different from the other groups out there.
Yeah, so one of the biggest kind of hurdles with COVID is first you have to make sure that the system works. And there's a shocking number of systems that actually just don't work. They're not able to contact trace properly. And what that basically means is they're missing contacts. So if you're missing contacts, then the contact tracing is not effective, right? If you run into 10 people and you only pick up 5, it's not effective. So the first piece is making sure that you've tested the contact tracing system and make sure that it actually does what they're saying that it does. The second piece of contact tracing is you have to make sure that people are using it. If people aren't using it, then the data you're collecting is incomplete. And with incomplete data, the contact tracing is not particularly valuable. And the way that we have basically approached that is that we've approached it from a sense of privacy by design, which is the way that our entire platform works. And by approaching it by privacy by design, we're only contact tracing when people are at a given site. So the minute you leave the site, the geofence is triggered and the contact trace stops. And that way you're telling people, look, we're not here to track you when you're at home, when you're at the grocery store, wherever else you're going. We're only contact tracing you when you're at this particular business, this particular casino, this particular hotel. We're only contact tracing you at this site to make sure that your interactions at the site are safe, and we will notify you or any other users if there's an issue with COVID at this particular site. And by encouraging people to sign up for a system that is privacy-centric, as well as making sure that the contacts are actually valuable and work, you've got your two-pronged solution to a successful and valuable contact tracing solution.
Okay, got it. I think the gaming industry is probably one of the most, active industries with respect to reopening and lobbying government and trying to get things up and back to where they were, or at least close to where they were. How do you propose that the industry successfully opens? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, so the industry reopening basically comes down to two separate sectors. One is regulatory confidence, and the other is consumer and staff confidence. The regulatory confidence is the first step, because if the government or regulatory agencies don't allow reopening, then the second piece doesn't really matter. So the first piece is making sure that government and regulatory commissions know that there is a game plan. There is a game plan, and something that they believe can actually happen, right? We've seen game plans that are just so unrealistic that it just doesn't instill confidence in regulatory agencies. And so simply making sure that you've got a system that is automated, that's electronic, that's digital, that's private, that's easy to deploy, gives regulatory commissions the confidence that, look, this is not going to be the next hotspot. Your business is not going to be a super spreader. And when they have that confidence, that's the first hurdle. The second hurdle is making sure that staff, both from a liability standpoint and just feeling confident in their own health and safety, and guests have a place and a way to come back in that is basically acknowledging the realities of a post-COVID world. And so those same tools that will give government agencies and regulatory commissions confidence can also give staff and guests the same sense of confidence in that, look, we're going to come in, it's safe, we're not going to be a super spreader location, and we know the people who are sick, we will keep them out, we'll quickly isolate, quarantine any of those individuals. So come in, have fun, let's reopen, and let's get back to business as usual.
Okay. And is there a way to leverage emergency communication and COVID solutions to do more than just that?
Yeah, this is a question that gets asked a lot. So it's almost like putting salt on the wound, right? You've had businesses that have been shut down for a whole year and a half in some instances, and you're saying, look, now we want you to spend more money to reopen. But the bottom line is, a lot of these businesses they've had no real revenue for months or a year. So how do you approach this? There are many standalone products out there that you can go and take a look at, and some of them don't work and some of them do work and some of them are fine products. But the question is, can you leverage an emergency communication platform that already has COVID built in? So you're basically killing two birds with one stone and don't have to add additional cost and expenditure and all of that, CapEx if you're looking at any hardware that you might use. And the answer to that is yes, there are platforms out there that will do all-in-one without charging more for COVID. And those are systems that we generally recommend, because basically you're able to reopen, meet all of the safety needs that you had before, whether they were weather-related incidents, medical-related incidents, shooting and violence-related incidents. And basically you just throw COVID as one more thing that they've got to navigate without the need to actually spend more money for that particular solution.
Okay, got it. Okay, I think we've covered everything. Do you have any closing comments, Vic? Anything for Canadian casino owners and operators, the lottery corps? Anybody joining us today? Any final thoughts or suggestions as they look at their reopening plans?
That's a great question. And the bottom line is this: you can reopen safely. It can be done. We've done it. So the sweet spot of all of this is having a digital procedure that mirrors the in-person procedure, and showing governments, regulatory commissions, as well as staff and guests, we have a plan, it's automated, it's easy, let's get back to business.
All right, good stuff. Well, I wish we were at our gaming summit physically in a face-to-face in the session room, but unfortunately we're not. So having said that, thanks again for your time today, Vic, and we'll move to our closing remarks.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Vic, and for your excellent, timely, and relevant presentation. To all of those with us today, please note that we will be sending you a recording of today's presentation. The link can be shared with colleagues, your staff, your team, and we will also post the webinar recording link on the Canadian Gaming Summit website. Please mark your calendars and plan to join us for the next Canadian Gaming Summit webinar, which is going to be held on May 18th, beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The May 18th webinar will be delivered by Larry Fritz, Gaming and Hospitality Practice Lead with Infotech Research Group, and Larry will be joined by one of their U.S. casino clients. This webinar will address a number of important details related to preparing for the inevitable reopening of your property. Research insights, best practices, lessons learned from U.S. operators, patron behavioral changes, effective patron marketing programs, gaming floor design layout, food and beverage delivery, and more will be addressed. Please plan to join us. For additional details and to register for the May 18th webinar, to register for our final pre-summit webinar on June 1st, and to attend our June 9th and 10th virtual Canadian Gaming Summit, please visit our website, www.canadiangamingsummit.com. Please note that your registration includes full access to all 2021 Canadian Gaming Summit webinars and also the virtual Canadian Gaming Summit on June 9th and 10th. As you may have noticed, we're providing delegate registrations this year at no charge to help support the entire Canadian gaming industry and to also remain connected with our colleagues during these challenging times. Again, we'd like to thank IGT and Canby for our sponsorship today. Their support is very much appreciated. And my only closing remark is that all of you please take care, and looking forward to connecting with you soon. Bye for now.
That concludes today's presentation. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you all on the 18th of May, May 18th, for the next webinar in this series. Thank you once again. Take care.